Okay. Good morning. Good morning, everyone. My name is Zbigniew Lasocik. I represent Human Trafficking Studies Center from Warsaw University. And I am honored to be part of this special event, and I'm especially privileged to moderate this this panel on human rights and violation of human rights and human trafficking. I'm joined by three experts, exceptional experts, eminent, and very much devoted to human rights. Let me introduce them. The names will be displayed on the screen, but let me welcome them and say a few words about them. On my left is Iya Dunashvili from Georgia. Iya is an expert in migration, refugees, but first of all, she's a member of a group of experts of Council of Europe called Greta, and this body checks implementation of the Council of Europe Convention on Human Trafficking. Then there is Craig Prest from Hope for Justice. He's a director of communication, and what is important that, in fact, he realized that he's coming to Poland only yesterday. So thank you very much for your efforts to be with us. And finally, we have Aaron Assay, Chief Medical Officer of organization Ariel Recovery. And he's typical sort of frontliner. He's a person operating in the field, and he will say a few words about that. I will probably reduce our presentation to this because yesterday I participated in the panel where auto presentation started after 35 minutes. I think that is a little bit too much. My dream, as we agreed with panelists, is that we will, first of all, would like to know what the audience thinks. Although the audience is sort of reduced a little bit, but I hope some people will come. And then I also hope that a quantity will turn into quality. As you can know from the description of our panel, we say that the panelists will be confronted with the key question: how we can protect victims of war. Who should do that? And how to do it? Whatever we say at this congress or conference, it's extremely important, whether it's agriculture, medicine, economy, money, military equipment. But I think the most important part of what we do here is people, and especially those most vulnerable. In the war and the brutal attack of Russia left us no doubt that also for Russia to hit people is the main source of satisfaction, very bad satisfaction. In the title of this panel, we have two words. One is human rights. One is human rights. And okay, here you can see the panelist. Human rights is what is in the title of this panel. What is human rights? Human rights is a shield which protects us from the evil state. Doesn't matter whether it's our own state or any other state. And then the second term, which is in the title, is human trafficking. Human trafficking is a situation when a person is being controlled by any other person, but the level of control is so high that we can talk about enslavement, but there is purpose for that. The main aim of this enslavement is exploitation, either in sex or in work, in begging or in organs, doesn't really matter. So this panel will be on all that. At this screen, you can see a little bit of figures. Until today, Poland accepted 8 million people. 6 million left Poland back to Ukraine, but still there is 2 million people either in Poland or in neighboring countries. The concept we use to describe human trafficking is 4P: prevention, protection, prosecution, and partnership. Prevention means to do everything what is possible to not to be victimized, that people are not victimized. In front of me there are leaflets we produced to warn women coming to Poland. But we have to be effective in that. I hope a panelist will answer to this question, how to be most effective in prevention. Protection, shelters, registrations, NGOs, protection, support. Prosecution, this is obligation of state, and this is how to bring perpetrators to justice. And finally, partnership. We all have to do whatever is possible to be effective in working together. And I understand this Congress is for that. And the last word I want to use is a vulnerable group. In fact, war created millions of people who are ideal victims for perpetrators. Ideal victims in a sense that these women coming to Poland are completely tired, frozen, hungry, with children, completely lost. So this is ideal situation for traffickers to benefit from that. I will now raise several questions which I hope panelists will answer. But as to the procedure, we agreed that panelists will speak for 10 minutes. Then if there will be need for reaction, they will be given a little bit of time for that. And then the rest of the time will be for the discussion, for our discussion and exchange of views. So first question, how to protect victims effectively? How to monitor people coming to Poland or to any other countries and families? How to create system of accountability? How to make people coming or crossing the border safe? What to do to protect orphans? How to monitor criminals not to commit crimes? How to make all the legislation, anti-trafficking legislation effective or effectively implemented? How to make partners to work together? And finally, how to organize similar Congress only on victims of war and human trafficking. Okay, that would be introduction, and now I will give the floor to Iya.
Thank you, Professor. Thank you for setting the tone to our discussion today. Ladies and gentlemen, dear partners in the fight against trafficking in human beings. I'm honored to be the part of this panel on assessment of human rights violations and mitigation of human trafficking risks. First of all, let me begin by thanking the organizers of the World for Ukraine Summit that are bringing the world together to create better humanitarian, social, and economic solutions for the Ukrainian relief effort. I speak today in my capacity of the member of GRETA. GRETA is the group of experts on action against trafficking in human beings, which is the monitoring mechanism of the Council of Europe Anti-Trafficking Convention. The convention is signed by and ratified by the 48 countries across Europe, but is open for universal ratification. Since 2009, GRETA has monitored the implementation of the convention by its state parties. The chaos generated by wars has always been an opportunity for traffickers to target vulnerable individuals because of their loneliness, trauma, and lack of means. And Professor has already spoken a bit about that, and I'm sure my fellow panelists will elaborate on that as well. But today, the millions of persons internally displaced in Ukraine or seeking refuge in other countries make the situation unprecedented for most stakeholders in Europe since World War II, and including for the monitoring mechanism that I represent. On 17th of March 2022, Greta called on states to act urgently to protect people fleeing Ukraine from human trafficking, and recalled the heightened vulnerability to human trafficking of internally displaced persons. Since the early days of the war, the anti-trafficking actors have been vocal about the risks of trafficking in the crisis, based on pre-existing trafficking trends within the country and the region, knowledge on trafficking in emergencies gleaned from previous crises, and the specificities of this crisis, in particular the predominance of women and children amongst the refugees and displaced persons. So the good thing that happened, for the first time, the 2001 European Union Directive on Temporary Protection was activated during this war. As a direct consequence, official and safe legal routes were established for people fleeing the conflict in Ukraine, offering them a comprehensive set of assistance measures. However, not everyone could benefit for those, and I'll come back to that to tell you something that I have seen firsthand in the fact-finding missions that I have participated in. Countries outside the EU have also rapidly activated their own set of protection measures, which is essential to mitigate the risks of trafficking. State parties to the Council of Europe Anti-Trafficking Convention have increased responsibility in these challenging times, given that risks of trafficking are aggravated. And we, as Greta, received several requests for advice on how to respond to this responsibility. So what Greta did on the 4th of May, we urgently developed a guidance note on addressing the risks of trafficking in human beings related to the war in Ukraine and the ensuing humanitarian crisis. Now, the aim of this guidance note is to provide practical advice to the states to ensure that public agencies, NGOs, private sector, and general public are aware of the risks of trafficking in their dealings with people fleeing the war, and on how to provide support in order to minimize these risks. The guidance note tried to have a rapid impact, to focus on action that can be implemented quickly without the need of legislative reforms or structural changes, because there is no time for that during the emergency. It addresses a broad range of issues such as registration and safe routes, immediate assistance and integration, information and awareness raising, detection of potential victims and traffickers and vulnerable groups, as well as cooperation, coordination, and data collection. However, this document does not seek to be exhaustive. It is a living document, and there is always room for improvement. Among the actions recommended, I would like to insist on following 4, bearing in mind that challenges evolve very quickly, and what is not of a concern today can become one tomorrow. So it should be ensured that all unaccompanied and separated children are registered and benefit immediately from effective protective care arrangements, including safe and specialized accommodation, with trained staff alerted to the risk of human trafficking, prompt and fluid exchange of information on missing children, as well as joint protocols on children who go missing should be implemented in coordination with all stakeholders, public and non-governmental, national and local. It should be ensured that protection is provided to all people fleeing the war in Ukraine without discrimination. In the first weeks of the war, there were reports of non-Ukrainian nationals being denied entry to bordering countries. So I've mentioned the temporary protection directive earlier. And under this EU directive, several people were excluded from the temporary protection, notably third country nationals who were irregularly residing in Ukraine, or some regularly, before the war, as well as EU nationals. So I've participated in a number of fact-finding missions, of which I'll speak brief towards the end of my presentation. And I have seen with my own eyes in the main station in Prague, hundreds of Roma people, the citizens of Ukraine, who also were granted EU passports, Hungarian passports, before the elections in Hungary. So these people, the Ukrainian citizens, Roman travelers, who also were granted these EU passports as EU nationals, being very vulnerable already, being who they are, were denied this temporary protection under this EU directive. And the stakeholders, both in Czech Republic and in Slovakia, who I met together with the delegation, they raised concerns over people from the Roma minority who are both Ukrainian and EU nationals, that they're excluded from the right to assistance and housing on the basis that they have to return to their EU country of origin, in that particular case Hungary, where they were discriminated. So, to underline, bearing in mind that Roma people are already vulnerable to trafficking in human beings, we as Greta are concerned that the lack of protection offered to them will increase the risks even more. It is important to ensure sufficient resources so that the provision of immediate and long-term assistance does not rely mostly on private and non-governmental initiatives. The recent events have demonstrated once again the predominant role played by civil society organizations in responding to humanitarian crisis. We must acknowledge that state authorities are doing the best they can, but the lack of public resources, especially human and material resources, leave a room wide open for individual and groups with bad intentions to take advantage of vulnerable people. So there are a few questions that Professor raised, but I also raised in my intervention, which I don't have the exact answers to right now, and this is remains to be answered and to be part of the discussion, is how do we conduct a vetting of all individuals who provide assistance and organizations offering help without sufficient staff? How do we effectively provide assistance to and detect potential cases of trafficking without trained professionals? Mind you, human resources are expected to decrease over time due to the fatigue of the frontline individuals, and this fatigue is getting stronger. And finally, we must address challenges in the medium and long term. Attention must be paid to all forms of exploitation. That is to say, not only sexual exploitation, but also labor exploitation and domestic servitude, among others. And states should ensure work opportunities for all people entitled to international protection, to set up jobs placement schemes, counseling, vocational training, and encourage employers to recruit qualified workers from among refugee population. And then due to the language barriers and lack of recognition of skills, people fleeing the war in Ukraine are more likely to turn to high-risk sectors such as agriculture, cleaning, domestic care, food delivery. And they should be targeted by action by labor inspectors to monitor high-risk sectors, as well as proactive monitoring of the internet and screening of job advertisements and sexual services websites. So just to say a couple of words about the fact-finding missions that I've mentioned, the Council of Europe has a special representative to the Secretary General on Migration and Refugees, who has conducted in spring the fact-finding missions in Slovakia, Czech Republic, Moldova, and Poland. And I had an honor as an anti-trafficking advisor to accompany her in her I'll be finishing now. In her missions, and I had a chance to go to the borders and speak to people firsthand, like in the beginning of the war. So I did have a few examples that I wanted to mention, but since we're running out of time, and I really don't want to hijack the time of my fellow panelists, I just want to finish my presentation by following a few sentences. That current humanitarian crisis is not outside of the phenomenon of human trafficking, and the figures hardly give a clear picture. I had a chance to listen to Aaron's keynote speech yesterday, and he mentioned some figures, and I tend to agree that those are at least double, if not quadruple. And our collective duty is to ensure that the fight against human trafficking remains at the top of the agenda, and that the unprecedented situation stemming from the war in Ukraine must be and let me use this word, an opportunity for countries to design and implement comprehensive strategies to deal more effectively with the risks of human trafficking. Thank you.
Oops, sorry. She's not well. Thank you so much. Yeah. Okay, one sentence to our aim. We want this panel to help us to find solutions, and then discussion will be on solutions. You mentioned recommendations, Council of Europe recommendations, but they are directed, as you rightly said, to the states. But what to do if the states are not interested? And participating in several panels, I noticed that state as an actor is not present in the discussion. There is business, there is NGOs, there are local communities, local governments, but where is the state? Okay, thank you very much. Now I will pass the floor to Craig, please. Do you have mic?
Yeah, thank you. Welcome, everyone. I'll just see if I can get my slides up. There we go. Did it without even touching a control. How's that? So yeah, I'm from Hope for Justice, and we are an anti-trafficking non-profit. And we run projects all over the world, across 30 locations in 5 continents. And we work directly with victims and survivors. Our whole purpose is, the reason why we exist is to live in a world free from slavery. And we do that by preventing exploitation, rescuing victims, restoring lives, and reforming society. But in terms of what we're doing specifically to human trafficking of Ukrainians on the move, it's a complex situation. It's not easy, and there is no simple fix. But that doesn't mean we can afford to do nothing and just sit back. And I'm going to talk to you briefly this morning about some of the ways that we've been working to bring impact. And I've got a few slides that will come up, really just for the purposes of having QR codes on there. So we've got some supporting information that may be of interest to you, in which case, rather than me have to go through it, it's easier for you just to use the QR codes. That's not me. That's the CEO of our organisation, who was supposed to be speaking today, and unfortunately he's had a family emergency, so he's had to stay at home. No.
He wants to stay on the screen.
That top one?
This and this.
Oh, there you go. Amazing. If you press the right button, it's amazing what happens, isn't it? phenomenal. Okay. So we're seeing, as we've already heard, a mass migration into a lot of the neighboring countries, with exploitation risks across all types of trafficking in these countries and in these communities, including 2.5 million individuals who were moved by force into Russia. And in fact, we've not seen this amount of people on the move since the Second World War. We're also seeing those fleeing the Ukraine coming to the UK under the government's Home for Ukraine scheme. Interestingly, 30% of the hosts who joined the scheme to help those fleeing the Ukraine no longer wish to continue to have those they've committed to help staying in their properties, threatening them with homelessness. And of course, there are additional risks around sexual exploitation and domestic servitude by those in the homes, as we've seen, children in many cases being placed into unofficial foster care placements. Many of the case studies we have are of children being sexually exploited by their hosts. And it's not uncommon that elderly men of 75 years and above have been responsible for exploiting mother and children. Many of the local authorities are struggling with capacity to ensure robust safeguarding measures are in place, and some local authorities are reporting that they are months behind schedule due to the high workload. Now, our government is doing and looking at ways to provide future support, but sadly the reality is that many environments are increasing the vulnerability of the individuals to forms of exploitation. The safeguarding process has been poor, and that's why our programme support for individuals is so important. And we're seeing an increase of women and children coming into the UK on migration schemes, and that's not just into the UK, that's widely across Europe. And one of the areas of work we've been involved in as part of our working with those who find themselves in vulnerable situations is through awareness and training of risks that they might face. We've partnered with others across our sector, such as World Vision, providing communication hubs at the borders where we produce key communications warning those fleeing the Ukraine about the risks of trafficking. These were multilingual, of course, Ukrainian, Russian, and other languages. These communication hubs were ideal because what they did is they allowed the refugees or those fleeing from Ukraine to come over the border and to just have some practical help. So things like recharging mobile phones so they could contact family. They could access help and support from organizations through laptops that were made available. And these communication hubs were placed at all of the borders, and we found that to be a really, initially, a really great way to kind of assist and help. We're developing improved reporting mechanisms and identifying and tracking those at most risk through tech projects. And this has been a really key development of ours. So we've been working with companies such as Intel and R3, and we're working to offer groundbreaking blockchain technology for intelligence sharing across borders for better identification of victims. But not only that, but also equally important to track down trafficking patterns of the perpetrators. We've seen a seismic shift in the increases and searches on web for Ukrainian women porn, or Ukrainian child porn. And we're having discussions with tech partners now, like Google, on how we can identify core perpetrators and criminal gangs through IP addresses and cyber locations, particularly through the dark web. And this is all supported by our kind of global clearinghouse for training, learning, and education on modern slavery. We've got some world-class programs for law enforcement, medical frontline workers and other agencies that we are involved in. But it's a huge and complex situation which is going to take not just organisations like on the stage here you have today before you, but working with governments and working with corporates. Tim Nelson, who would have loved to have been here today, our CEO, recently spoke at the OSCE, which is the Organisation for Security and Cooperation in Europe, and spoke to 56 governments about the issue, about how women and children especially are prone to exploitation whilst on the move. Perpetrators using basic needs such as food security, accommodation, as key routes for exploitation. We convene a movement. We're engaging with governments at global and national level, civil society, and we're also partnering closely with the private sector. We also see the impact of collaboration. At Hope for Justice, we worked as part of a coalition of NGOs across our sector to create a specific website, social media takeover, and phone messaging for Ukrainians entering into the UK, with information not just about the risks, but more importantly about their rights. So this was rights to legal, to working, to housing, and also key contact numbers for help and support. And you can see the link there on the slide with the QR code if you'd like to take a look at that website. Another example is where we brought a number of international NGOs in a coalition where we took specific countries. And for example, in the UK, we reached 1 in 10 of the UK population with information about spotting the signs of human trafficking, including the signed petition to our government, the UK government, to improve its policies around the issue. We've also started work with other INGOs whose infrastructure already is established in country. And on the ground, our focus has been in Moldova, where we've been running assessments of the many individuals, especially women and children, who are found at risk. And using that strategy also to look elsewhere, how we can make lasting impact. This past week, our training team has been in Cyprus, training law enforcement on how to spot the signs of human trafficking and modern-day slavery. And we need specialist forces to help find those exploited and know how to act when identifying those who are bringing that exploitation. So effectively bringing perpetrators to justice. In fact, Hope for Justice did one of the first rapid assessments of risks of human trafficking as a result of the Ukrainian war. Again, you can download that paper on the screen. Hope for Justice has been party to a number of academic studies and conferences on the issue. And again, there's a QR code there regarding those papers that we've produced. I'm going to finish very shortly, but I just want to say, as we move to the next phase of the effects of this war, we see wider impacts, i.e. energy, food prices. We've seen the inflations causing economic vulnerability, which of course is a key driver to human trafficking. Rocketing grain prices will cause vulnerability and increase in human trafficking. Russia and Ukraine together account for 30% of the global wheat trade. And this is why government strategy and implementation, alongside individuals supporting the cause, is more important than ever. If we don't take this seriously and act now, we could witness a genuine risk of a humanitarian crisis affecting all of Europe. It's incumbent not on just a few of us, but all of us to do something. It's a necessity for all of us to take responsibility and to act accordingly. No excuses. We all can do something to make a difference. Thank you.
Thank you, Greg. To bring what you said to very ground, imagine people crossing Ukrainian-Polish border, mostly women with children on foot. And Polish civil society offered hot soup. But the question was, who was offering security? Whose responsibility was that? Unfortunately, state was not there. And these people were not supposed to offer security. They did a lot, even inviting these people to their houses. That's one question. And the second issue, one of the recommendations, and Craig also mentioned that, one of the tools to control and to help and to protect is registration. But some people were asking questions, are we allowed to register these people? They haven't committed crime. They are free people. Are we allowed to register them? We say we need to monitor them, but are we allowed to do that? And these are the questions we have to answer, because maybe, hopefully not, but there might be the second wave of people coming to countries like Poland. With all these, I'm very happy to give the floor to Aaron. The floor is yours. Thank you very much.
Thank you. So, my colleagues have presented the questions that we're asking and a few others that I hadn't thought of. Some of these questions I don't have answers for. I'm very much a boots-on-the-ground person with aero recovery, but since 2014 with Operation Underground Railroad. And I've been actively confronting this issue face-to-face and interacting directly with traffickers. So I apologize if this is maybe a knuckle-dragger comment, but my solution is let's go hunt the predators. So we need an army of hunters. And thank you. However, I know we can't do that, and there's also other problems around that. So this is a human problem, and as human beings, we are motivated by emotion. So I want to, in addition, and I apologize, Professor, I'm going to share a couple of stories with my questions, because I feel that this is one of the issues. And if you look around this room, all the panel discussions I've been in, this is the least attendance I've seen in all of them. And that's the first problem. We don't want to talk about this. It is such an uncomfortable subject. It's taboo. So the problem is we're not discussing. And if you don't discuss it, how are you going to find solutions? So I want to start by just sharing a quick story about one of our first missions when we first arrived in Ukraine. We began with government support. In fact, at the behest of the Ukrainian government, we were given assignments of where to go find orphans and displaced people who were soon to become refugees and give them safe passage, help them through the war zone. And one of our first assignments was to go to an orphanage where, when we arrived, there was already another bus there waiting to load children. In fact, some were already loaded, but the bus was having mechanical problems. So we went to help and soon realized that this bus driver was not there with government sanction. He was there on his own with plans to take the children someplace else than safe passage. It was obviously somebody, a criminal, who was trying to move these kids where they could be used for some other purpose. And fortunately, his bus broke down. So we were able to load those kids into our bus and leave before he was able to take these children. So, and that was the very beginning. That was in March when that happened. So the very beginning of the war. So you can kind of explain that away and, oh, the chaos and you know, the fog of war, all these things were happening, but that problem was resolved. Well, it actually wasn't. Not long after that, another case, we were loading refugees in Chernihiv, moving them safely to Lviv. We had some orphans too on that particular mission. And as we were waiting, we noticed a beautiful young woman who was obviously alone, trying to make a decision. And so one of my colleagues went and struck up a conversation with her, and we discovered that she had been invited to go with a small group in a small car where she had been offered passage through Poland to Amsterdam, where she was going to be given a job as a model. Now, all of our red flags went up when I said that, right? Because that's like the main, like that's the ploy, right? With a beautiful young woman, hey, I'll give you a job as a model, and it's going to be a great life. You're going to make all this money. You're going to be famous. With really some very easy research, we discovered that this was not the case, and we convinced her to come with us. And in this particular case, we even took care of her for a little while so that she could get her feet under her in her new location. And she's now doing excellent. We've stayed in contact. So, 2 stories, 2 issues. Who's taking care of these orphans? Who's tracking what happens? Who's educating these individuals? And the professor showed me a pamphlet that they did, which is excellent. I wish this young girl had seen that, and then we wouldn't have had to step in because that was a disaster averted. One more story. We had a orphanage that had too many kids for us to transport, so there were other groups that were also transporting. And about 70 of the children we were able to get to the, again, government sanctioned. You know, I don't want to say, the Ukrainian government is doing amazing things with the resources that they have. So let me just say that as a little side note. I am so impressed with what they've been able to do. And in fact, the way they responded to this. So we rescued these 70 orphans, and there was another group too that had brought some orphans to the safe orphanages near Lviv. And then not long after we arrived, we got an angry phone call asking where the other 135 orphans went. They completely disappeared. They were in another group of buses, nobody knows where they went, and we still can't answer the question. So they were there with us. We didn't know what happened. We couldn't track everybody. So there's the third problem, is who's tracking? Who's making sure that when this child leaves this location, do they end up over here, and is that child still in the care? So like I said, this is a human problem. We're human beings, we're emotional beings. It's these emotions that are going to drive us to act. So for Aero Recovery, our goal, I mean, like I said, my solution is to get out in the trenches and go combat, go hunt these predators, go find them, go actively grab these children, take them to safety. But we don't have enough resources to do that. We need to educate, we need to motivate, we need to get more people involved, doing all the different, there's tons of work, and you can see the 3 of us do 3 completely different jobs in this space. But all of those jobs are absolutely necessary, and the professor too. So the 4 different jobs in this space, and all of these jobs have to be done. And infinite other jobs that need to be done for us to fight. This human problem is, in my opinion, this is the crisis of our day. Yes, the Ukraine war is a crisis. It's terrible what's happening. But it's feeding into the largest crisis of today, and that's we are losing. Slavery is growing. It's the fastest growing criminal trade in the world, $150 billion industry. And the second largest. How does that not have every country up in arms saying, we have to combat this? We have to stop this, because the end result is what? All of humanity enslaved. Like, that's the trajectory that we're going. And if we aren't doing things to stop that, if we aren't having these conversations at the highest levels, that is not going to stop. These solutions that we're talking about here, these little things that need to happen at the highest levels. And hopefully we can have an influence in that. We're trying. My friend Tim Ballard, who is the CEO for Operation Underground Railroad and is my mentor, posted a post today. And this is just the last thing I want to say, the last story with my last minute and a half. His first international rescue. 2 children, Colleen and Cole. They were young children when they were rescued. They were being sold out of Haiti. This is knowledge everybody should have if you know anything about Operation Underground Railroad. He was going to pay $30,000 for these two kids. Unfortunately, the government was able to intervene. This orphanage that was getting kids in the front and selling them out the back. These two women were arrested. This trafficking ring was broken up. And Tim was able to adopt these two children. And today he posted a picture of his son Cole at his football game. And I got teary-eyed thinking the life that that child could have had if he hadn't been there to intervene, if he hadn't directly gotten involved and stopped that from happening. I know what would have happened to that child because I've seen those children, I've cared for them, I've rescued them, I've failed at times and had to leave them behind. And they haunt my dreams at night. These children, these women, and these men who are being abused, who are being exploited, it needs to stop. And these solutions that we're coming up with, hopefully this conversation today comes up with something that will reach these highest levels, that people will take action and help us to join this fight.
Thank you very much. Really heartbreaking stories. But let me, for a sec, make our life even more difficult. Imagine a shelter, a huge shelter close to Warsaw. Young woman, 25 years, and with the child, 3 years. And she brought with her 2 rings, each of them of value, say, 5,000 zlotys. And after some time, she needs some money for cookies or whatever, and she offers one of the rings to the staff of this shelter, and somebody offers her 1,000. And she agrees. And she gives the ring, and the money is paid. And it's not the end of the story. After some time, when the second ring was sold, then she still needs money, and the war is on, so she is looking for the job. She goes on the market, and she's offered the job for 2,000 zlotys, 7 days a week, hard work. And she's exploited, and nobody cares. So I'm absolutely with my heart for hunting predators. But where are the predators in this story? Who is predator? They are everywhere, because war victims are super vulnerable, not only to criminal activities, also to semi-criminal activities. Okay, is there anything you would like to comment in your presentations? You would like to say a few words about, to react to other presentations? That is something what we, yeah, please, go ahead.
I just wanted to ask the question in the room, if that's okay. Just hands up those who have actually taken the time to educate themselves on spotting the signs of modern-day slavery and human trafficking. Yeah, a couple of hands ago. Thanks for that. The reason I mention this is we all think, well, what can we do? Like, you know, many of you in this room are probably already giving financially to humanitarian causes, and you're volunteering, and you're doing all kinds of things, and you're looking at this massive issue, 50 million people estimated to be exploited in human trafficking and modern-day slavery. In fact, those figures have just been announced recently. It was 40.3. It's now gone to 50. And I just want to encourage you all. There's one thing you can do, and that is to just take 5 minutes and learn how to spot the signs of modern-day slavery. And the reason I mention that is very quickly, I want to tell you just for 30 seconds a story. We trained a small group of people to spot the signs of and it was just a 20-minute meeting. And sometime after, a couple who'd been in our meeting came to us and said, "Hey, Hope for Justice, we think there's something odd here. with this business at the end of our street. We've kind of see people coming and going in vans at strange hours. There's lights on in the house at strange times. There's crazy movement. We honestly think there's something odd here, and it ticks the spot the signs. So okay, so our investigators went in and they agreed that, you know, having sort of looked at it, that this was highly possible, and they partnered with law enforcement and they raided that property. Now, normally when you raid a property, you'll find 2 or 3, maybe 4 or 5 victims. And as we raided that property, it led us to another property, and to another property, and to another property, all the way from northwest in the UK all the way back to Poland. And we rescued 400 victims of modern-day slavery. 13 criminal gang members went to jail, and we are still working with a lot of those victims, providing care, support, everything else that they needed. We found 4 Bentleys, £2 million in cash, and the victims were living in squalor. I mean, you know, they were having to bathe themselves in the local canal. It was unbelievable what we found. And I say that not to shock you. I mean, your stories were amazing. But I say that because it was 2 people just like you. It wasn't anyone kind of in the sector. It wasn't anyone it wasn't a CEO. It was like 2, you know, people who'd just taken some time to learn what it means to spot those vulnerable in slavery. And I just want to encourage you all, if you've not done that, please do it. Because you will come across victims of slavery in your everyday. It's in all our cities, all of our towns, all of our neighborhoods. It's likely even to be at the corner of your street. So I just wanted to encourage you to do that.
Okay, thank you. Any other reactions, rather? No?
Just want to say, just to reiterate that,
Yeah.
that when you learn about it, when you educate yourself, you tend to have an easier time talking about it. And so that's one of the issues that we can't talk about it. Well, if more people will get educated, if they will just take 5 minutes, there's so many websites where you can learn about this stuff. Then you're willing to talk about it to friends, to family members, to other people that you meet when that subject comes up, with a little bit of knowledge.
Absolutely. Thank you. Yeah. No. Let me remind you that out of these 4 Ps, the prosecution comes third. First is prevention and protection. Okay, now the floor is open. If there are any comments, suggestions, questions, whatever you want, now the floor is yours, and then there are mics will be distributed, and we dream to have interaction. Anybody? Yes, there are 2 questions on this side, please. Kindly, please introduce yourself briefly and then ask question.
Right. Thank you so much. Chleb Sloyo, Polish Red Cross. The panel is called Human Rights Violation and Human Trafficking of Ukrainians on the Move. My question is about third nationals that are living currently in Ukraine. And firstly, at the very beginning, when the conflict escalated, 21st February, the third country nationals had a lot of problems entering the borders in Romania and Hungary, and Slovakia, and especially Poland. How to deal with it? You also mentioned that Ukrainian government did a great job protecting Ukrainians on the move. What about third country nationals? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Anybody?
Thank you for this question. I don't know whether you were here in the beginning of the panel when I was doing my presentation, and I have underlined this problem because I have seen it myself with my own eyes, including for example, the third country nationals fleeing from Ukraine, including Azerbaijanians, Indians, just to name the few who were there on the border with Slovakia, on the border with Moldova, that sadly on one hand, but on the other hand, I was glad to be there to see it firsthand. And yes, it is a great problem, great issue, because yes, we're talking about Ukrainians fleeing the war. We are talking about protection mechanisms for them, but what about other people who are affected by war as much as the Ukrainian nationals are? So this is me being the expert of the group that holds the states accountable to their obligations under the Anti-Trafficking Convention, and human trafficking being, in the first place, a human rights violation, because we have the obligation of the state here to protect the people. It is very important that states on the territories of which these third country nationals are act and provide the protection, but first of all, the detection and the prevention. So yes, this is a very important question, and the awareness is being raised about that, and the some actions are being taken, but definitely not enough. So this is something that really needs to be raised and underlined. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Hello, my name is Radek Lebowski. I am the head of the IT Magis company from Poland. One question. Have you any intel about human trafficking on the occupied side? Or this is a different story entirely? I mean, what Russian occupators are doing with the on the occupied territory. Thanks.
I can make a quick comment about it, but this is anecdotal. So, you know, a lot of what's happening over there is not getting out, but anecdotally, right? We're hearing stories from people that have been rescued from that side or have come back from that side, but we know we've lost thousands to illegal adoption, illegal foster care. We know of particularly orphanages being emptied and sent to Russian territory with no record whatsoever of where they've gone. So it's happening. As far as what's happening to them after that, who knows? We know that trafficking is rampant in Russia and all the surrounding countries. So it's reasonable, you know, logical to accept the fact that it's going on.
Yeah, thank you for this question. My answer would also be, on one hand, anecdotal in terms of that I don't have the intel, as I am not in the law enforcement, but rather working on the policy level. But that's nothing new. It's nothing that started with this war now. It already, let's say, started in 2014. And this has been happening already then in Ukraine. But not only in Ukraine, in all the because I'm from that part of the world, if I'm talking about all former Soviet republics that have conflict zones, I myself am from Georgia. I can speak of Abkhazia and South Ossetia, Transnistria in Moldova. These areas, these occupied territories, are the origin and destination for trafficking. And human trafficking and exploitation has been and is continuing to take place, and now even more. So yes, the internal trafficking is happening, especially on the territories that are occupied, because the state doesn't have control over it. So
prior to the war, that was the European center for trafficking, and it still is. It's logical to just assume that that's happening because it was.
And I'm sure there is intel. It just, we personally...
Well, we have the intel from 2014 and since then. So we know it was going on then. All this has done is made it more possible. It's easier now.
Yes.
There's another question. Oh, so there are two.
Hello.
Sorry.
Yeah, sorry. I'm Magda. I work for two legal aid organizations, Safe Passage and Alil. And I have two questions. So the first is, how do you make sure that in a crisis in a humanitarian situation, that the goodwill of people can be both used for good, whilst making sure that volunteers are aware of the risks of trafficking, and how do you train them up in a quick and effective way without putting them off, I guess. And the second bit is how is it possible to register people on the move and make sure that you're able to do the monitoring work that's necessary to get them from A to B safely, while making sure that there's no surveillance risks, that the collection of that data is not then used against them.
Let me just add, are we allowed to register? Yeah. Anybody?
Yeah, just to come back on your first question, it's a really good question. And we found this ourselves as an organisation. We were like, okay, we can do this. Do you know what I mean? There's funding available, there's things we can do. And actually, in a very short space of time, we came to the conclusion that actually the best way to have the biggest impact was to work with the organisations who were already specialists, who were already on the ground, that already had infrastructure developed, and actually to support them in what they were doing as opposed to trying to do something ourselves. And I think the temptation for anyone who wants to help is to, especially from an organisational point of view, is to set up and think that they're the answer to the problem. And in most cases, that just amplifies the problem. It's recognising where the specialisms are, where the authority is, and also where there's been proven track record. So by working with those that are established, have that track record that's proven, that's, to me, the answer to the question. It's not by running off and trying to do something and feeling that you can save the world yourself, or organisations feeling they can set themselves up as the answer. That's not the answer. So. Yeah, I think for volunteers, I would suggest that they do look out those organisations that are being profiled as the key organisations, and they'll have satellite organisations that will be feeding that organisation, that they can go and get good training, that they can be a part of. Because I understand a lot of people want to help. And I would say if you go on the websites, there's always 4 or 5 leading organisations that are available and are looking for volunteers, and who will train, who will take time, who won't just take that help and misuse it. So that would be my recommendation.
Oh, you were okay. I hate these ladies first. It has nothing to do with the ladies, Okay, but anyway, jokes aside. What I can say, in spring, in the first months, I had a chance to also witness firsthand all the volunteers, let's say, at the borders, but also reception centers. And of course, with the exclusion of those really individual ones who were just there on their own, most of the volunteers were organized by someone, and that someone, if that was an NGO or an international organization or a UN agency who was organizing those volunteers, usually provides such trainings. And I have heard of these trainings, I have seen those, but of course more is needed, and something will fall through the cracks. But I can say that I have a positive feedback on that trainings, one way or another, are being conducted. As for your, but there's a need for more, and for, let's say, maybe shorter and simpler and more hands-on and ad hoc courses, if I may call it courses. There's always room for that, and that should continue. But what you've also mentioned, there's also the fatigue of the frontliners. And the numbers go down. If in the beginning there was the hype and everybody wanted to be there, with the 9 months into the war and more, we can see a great fatigue which is going to continue. So there's something needs to be done about that. And that would also include the types of trainings. As for the question about the registration, the 2001 EU temporary protection mechanism that was activated unprecedentedly with the Ukrainian war provides for such registration of the Ukrainian citizens that went to the EU countries. So this type of registration is happening. So that's sort of that is a tool within the mechanism. There is an issue with the third country nationals that have been mentioned, and those unfortunately fall through the cracks, though there is certain registration in their own, let's say, embassies in the countries of destination. The countries outside the EU who cannot use this temporary protection mechanism have a similar mechanism activated in those countries for the people fleeing the war in Ukraine. So that type of registration provides for certain follow-up where these people are. It's not perfect, but it is something. But the issue is of vetting, not as much of the registration. You know, you register these people one way or another officially. It's not only on the border, it is at the border, reception centers. I have seen few, I have actually attended the actual process of the registration. For example, in Czech Republic, which is not the border, but it was also the main country recipient and the main hub also from where the people were moving. There I have seen, for example, literally hundreds of Roma people from Ukraine sleeping on the bus. And I was really shocked because what they do is, so they come to Prague on the train. They have the Ukrainian and Hungarian passport. They don't speak any language. Some of them speak only Romani or Russian, for example. They don't even speak, some of them don't even speak Ukrainian. They definitely don't speak Hungarian. And they're ping-ponged from Hungary to Czech Republic without being eligible to the EU temporary protection mechanism because they have the EU passport. They could not have this individual accommodation because it was the family of 30 people. And there were, let's say, 100 of such families with toddlers to elderly of some 100 years old people with disabilities in the wheelchairs, other disabilities. These people are also people that are inherently vulnerable to exploitation. And in addition to that, they are they go through the secondary discrimination and secondary exploitation. So, so yes, registration, but then there are hidden and marginal populations that fall through the cracks. So
let's recognize too that it's not just the refugee population. It's not just the people that are leaving Ukraine, but inside Ukraine, the internally displaced people. So Ukraine actually has a very robust registration process. If you move from one place to another, for example, if we help move orphans from one orphanage to another, each orphan is tracked very specifically. And so there's cases right now of locations, you know, housing and safe houses and foster homes where that's not always happening. And the Ukrainian government is trying hard to track down those cases of, you know, why wasn't every person registered? Why don't you have a name of every person that has come through your facility? And we're suspecting that that is because there is also trafficking happening right now inside the country, not just when they leave. To answer your first question too, there's three levels of that. The individual needs to vet the organizations that they want to work with organizations that are willing to train. Find those organizations that have those programs that will give you what you need so that you can be a good volunteer. In our experience, that's absolutely mandatory. So we have a very robust training process. And in the beginning, we realized that this needed to happen. So we organized a training in Hungary. We trained Ukrainians to do undercover anti-human trafficking work, and that actually resulted in the arrest of a pedophile from the Netherlands and Mexico who was seeking out Ukrainians. So the process works. We just need to make those organizations that are doing it more robust, more successful by supporting them. And then we also need to, from the government level, needs to support those organizations that are doing that. And we realized very quickly that, because I'll use a US term, there's a lot of organizations that try to cowboy it, right? They show up and they just try to do the work, not really talking to anybody, just knowing the work that needs to be done and just muscle through it. But you can't do that. You have to vet yourself with the appropriate government bodies. Yes, sometimes it might be a little bit slower, but that gives you the clout, that gives you the sanction to go do the job, but also that gives you the government support where then they can actually say, look, we're doing this process, we're tracking everything that's happening, and you're doing it in the right way.
Thank you very much. I have the feeling, I'm sorry for that we are escaping from the main problem of the registration. This issue was raised in Poland on the very fundamental values, the conflict of values between security or safety and privacy. And that was the context of the question: are we allowed to do that? These people are victims of war, and if they are registered in Ukraine, fine. But the question is, for us, very practical problem for Poles. We accepted 8 million people. And is this registration we do? Because they are registered several times at the border, of course. Then if they apply and they want to stay in Poland, they have to apply for the special identity number. That's fine. But if they simply cross the border and we register them to help them, to monitor them effectively, is this okay or not? There was a question, sorry. Yeah, there is a microphone.
Thank you. This is Zbigniew Klonowski, Work for Ukraine. I just wanted to come back to the moment of the discussion we had about the people. They just crossed the border, they were offered the hot soup and so on. And there was two questions. One was already answered about the registration. But the second you asked, looking from the international law perspective, who is really responsible for the protection and who is responsible for safety of those people? That's my question.
It is a very good question. I will attempt to answer it representing the monitoring mechanism that holds states accountable to their obligations under the Council of Europe Anti-Trafficking Convention. As a member of the group of experts, when we go to the countries with the assessment, and I actually have a few examples from the countries that we just visited in the past few months in the third round of evaluation of the convention, where we also included the specific questions related to the trafficking during the war in Ukraine. According to the convention, according to the international law, it is the obligation of the state to protect its citizens and people on their territory from the human trafficking, because the human trafficking is the human rights violation and it is ultimately the responsibility of the state. So this is, let's say, the theoretical answer. Now, what happens in practice? In practice, all of the 48 states parties signatories to the Council of Europe Anti-Trafficking Convention, those are all Council of Europe member states and all EU member states, and some that are not EU member states. We also have Israel, for example, recently ratifying the convention. Always get those recommendations from us, and we have three levels. The level of urge is the highest level, where we urge the state to implement their recommendations. And this topic is always in all of the countries under urge, which means that the country is doing the minimum, they're implementing their obligations, but there's still so much room for improvement, so much urgency that we always urge. And I don't know, do I have another minute to maybe say a couple of things on the examples? Like, for example, we were in Poland in June with the third round of evaluation, which was postponed 3 times because the Polish government told us, we don't have time for you now because we're carrying to the Ukrainian refugees, which is a good thing, but that does not exclude them from their obligations under the convention. So at the end, we insisted and we came here. I wasn't there personally, but my colleagues were. They came to Rzeszów as well. So at the time of Greta's visit in June, so June, what, 4 months ago, yeah? No victims of human trafficking had been identified among persons fleeing the war in Ukraine, but 4 suspected had been detected and the investigations were ongoing into some of them. So this is what the authorities told us. So we are now sending the follow-up question, what is happening? In Spain, which also just happened, the man was detained and the girls were placed under the care of the child protection system in Madrid. So one case. In Netherlands, they had started 6 investigations into possible cases of trafficking. So I'm talking about the past 3 months. So these assessments just happened. In Sweden, we had some 40 Ukrainian refugees had complained about labor exploitation. However, after investigations, no victims of trafficking were identified. So just to conclude my intervention here, also the biggest issue that we see, the labor exploitation by most of the states is not considered human trafficking, which is wrong.
This kind of goes back to how I started my part of this. Perhaps we're asking the wrong question. Maybe monitoring the victims isn't the question we should be asking, or actually the solution that we're looking for. Perhaps monitoring the criminals would be better. Maybe we ought to make investigation of crime, of human trafficking, more robust. Maybe we ought to support law enforcement and these governments more. Maybe that's the side that we should be looking at, or at least one option for making the effort against human trafficking is to not commit these human rights violations of monitoring every person's movement, but actually going directly after the criminals who are perpetrating the crime.
Yes, this way or another, there is very simple answer for your very important question. State is responsible for the security, which the answer comes directly from human rights, because there's right to life, there's right to freedom, there is right to freedom from fear, and all these are basic human rights, and states are responsible for all that, because as I said in the introduction, human rights is sort of a shield which protects us from the evil state, from the state, but sometimes evil. But again, it's not that simple that monitoring of perpetrators is the solution. It is, but what is the precondition? That we come from a victim-oriented system of prosecution to intelligence-led policing, which in countries like Poland, where human trafficking is not a priority for law enforcement and for the government, then it's very difficult. But we have to be realistic. We are in Poland, and we are trying to solve problems with, possibly not, with another victims of war coming to Poland. And now the problem, this leaflet tries to help us how to inform women being in Poland not to be exploited by well or good-looking business people who dream to exploit. Yes, this is the problem, because they look very well and they pretend to be very supportive, but in fact they want to exploit this women. That's the problem. Okay, it looks like we are only 6 minutes left, or 5. So I will, if there is urgent question, there will be some time for this. If not, I will give 1 minute to each panelist to sum up or to comment or to say goodbye, whatever you like. Aaron, would you start now?
Thought I had 3 to go. I got this.
No, this time there is a place for justice always. Remember.
Thank you. Really, for me, I just want to thank the W4UA Symposium for inviting us to come here. This has been an amazing opportunity. We've had so many chances to network and discuss and meet people who are of a similar mind, and hopefully my goal is for us to increase awareness, education, and collaboration, because I think that's the answer to this problem. It's, as I said before, it being a human problem and being a human crisis. And as us, we talked about it being everywhere. It really is going to take all of us, all of our efforts to combat this. If we don't come together, if we don't learn how to work together, and I say this, kind of from an NGO standpoint, right? Because often these NGOs are just like, no, this is my area. I'm going to do this job, and you have your own space. You stay over there. It's like we're fighting over the opportunity to rescue kids, and it's terrible, and it's always made me sick to my stomach from the very beginning, and we need to stop that. We need to work together as NGOs, as governments, as individuals, and collaborate on how we can stop doing double the work and wasting the money and actually making an impact in the lives of these women, children, and men who've been trapped in this ever-growing evil. But again, thank you, and thank you, Professor. It's been a pleasure to meet you, and to my colleagues here on the panel. It's been really great talking with you guys, so hopefully we can keep discussing.
Thanks, Aaron. You covered a lot of what I was going to say about unity and collaboration, and that's really important. But I will go back to just a previous point, which is really about the challenge, I think, in the room is that the danger is in not doing something. We can all do something. And my encouragement to you is please don't leave this summit without doing something. And if your heart and your passion and your interest is in the human trafficking and modern-day slavery space, then please seek out the opportunity to help make a lasting impact. 50 million people estimated to be trapped in modern-day slavery. That's a big number. And it's going to take all of us to change that. And yeah, don't just treat this as it's been a nice talk, thank you very much, and go off and forget about it and enjoy your weekends. Think about it. How can I personally help impact that figure of 50 million? Thank you.
And to echo what my colleagues have so well put together, I would just want to say that every effort matters, no matter how small it is. Just want to give a really, really short example. In 2003, I went with the group of professionals to this. I accompanied them in the study visit to Ukraine and to Turkey. And I have seen the ferry from Trabzon to Odessa and from Odessa to Trabzon. And I have seen those potential, and some of them probably were, the victims of sex trafficking from Ukraine to Turkey and then coming back. So this was almost 20 years ago. It was spring 2003. And then people thought that human trafficking was happening only to the sex workers. And now, 20 years after, people who we thought would not be sensitized to this phenomenon to understand what it is are sensitized. So what I'm trying to say that everyone has a role, every effort matters, and most important is that concerted efforts matter. And we are all in this fight, and the war brought it out even more. So let's take this opportunity, I'm using this word again, in this terrible situation and increase our efforts to combat this terrible, terrible crime. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Poles, like many other societies, open hearts, wallets, doors for Ukrainians. Now I think it's a high time for states to open their minds, if they have any, for security issue. This is so important. It was it's been an honor for me to moderate this panel. And I promised our leader and our boss, Ms. Claudia Klonowska, that that would be the best panel of the Congress, of the conference. And I guess thanks to such an eminent, knowledgeable, and brave panelists and such excellent audience, I was not wrong. Thank you so much, and I wish you good, enjoyable lunch. Thank you so much.